The field of EQ skill development has truly blossomed since then, and we've taken special interest in tracking the changing landscape all along the way. What we found in our studies has sometimes startled and often encouraged us. What remains constant throughout our discoveries is the vitally important role EQ skills play in the quest to lead a happy, healthy, and productive personal and professional life. More specifically, our research sheds new light on the battle of the sexes, the generational divide, the quest for career advancement and higher paying jobs, as well as cluing us in on which countries are primed for future success in an increasingly global economy. All offer hope for those looking to increase their EQ skills. Here's what we found. The poles are melting. EQ then and now. At the end of 2008, we took a good look at how the collective EQ of the U.S. population had changed since 2003. While we weren't surprised to see those we tested and taught improve their EQ, we were intrigued to watch the EQ scores of newbies increase with each passing year. And the increase continued, year after year after year. The EQ scores of those we'd never tested or taught made a slow and steady climb from 75 to 79. We discovered a substantial increase in the emotional intelligence of the U.S. workforce between 2003 and 2007. Skeptics might be tempted to think, what's the big deal? That's just a 4-point increase in 5 years. But think of the impact a seemingly small temperature increase, say 1 or 2 degrees, has upon our ecosystem. The same is true with human behavior in the workplace, where the frozen poles of low emotional intelligence are starting to melt. Once we take a closer look at the specific changes the broad gains in EQ have created, the real power of the transformation comes to light. In the last 5 years, we've seen the percentage of people who are highly attuned to their own emotions and to the emotions of other people rise from 13.7% to 18.3%. During that same period, the percentage of people with a poor understanding of how anxiety, frustration, and anger influence their behavior has dropped from 31% to 14%. When you apply these proportions to the 180 million people in America's workforce, it means that 9 million more people today than in 2003 almost always keep their cool during heated conflicts. 9 million more people actually show that they care about their coworkers and customers when they suffer hard times. And 25 million fewer people are painfully oblivious to the impact their behavior has on others. What makes this discovery so special is that prior to taking the test, very few, if any, of the people in our sample had ever received formal emotional intelligence training. Yet their average EQ scores steadily increased from year to year. It's as if the people who intentionally practice emotionally intelligent behaviors are infecting others who may have never even heard of the concept. Emotional intelligence skills, much like emotions themselves, are contagious. That means that our EQ skills are highly dependent on the surrounding people and circumstances. The more we interact with empathetic people, the more empathetic we become. The more time we spend with other people who openly discuss emotions, the more skilled we become at identifying and understanding emotions. That is precisely what makes emotional intelligence a learned skill, rather than some unalterable trait bestowed only upon a lucky few at birth. But that's where the good times end. In 2008, for the first time since we began tracking it, collective emotional intelligence dropped, underscoring just how susceptible to change these skills truly are. Federal economists pinpointed December 2007 as the start of the United States' worst economy in 70 years, which means that 2008 did not see a single day without recession. The relapse in emotional intelligence skills between 2007 and 2008 is the product of economic woes. Hard times of any kind, financial, familial, or job-related, create more intense and often prolonged negative emotions that ultimately result in stress. In addition to the physical costs of stress, such as weight gain and heart disease, stress also taxes our mental resources. Under stress-free conditions, we can consciously devote extra effort to staying calm and collected during the trials and tribulations of everyday life. We are more confident in our abilities to handle unexpected events, and we allow our minds to overcome troublesome matters. Unmanaged stress, however, consumes much of those mental resources. It reduces our minds to something like a state of martial law in which emotions single-handedly dictate behavior while our rational capacities are busy trying to turn lemons into lemonade. Suddenly, a little setback in your project at work that would have been no big deal in relatively prosperous times feels more like a catastrophe than a minor nuisance. For many people, their EQ skills desert them at precisely the time when they need these skills the most, under stress. Only those with well-trained and almost second-nature EQ skills can effectively weather the storm. This stress seems to be having a significant impact on our collective emotional intelligence. We went from 18.3% of people being highly skilled in emotional intelligence in 2007 to only 16.7% in 2008. In other words, we lost 2.8 million highly skilled soldiers in the battle for a more emotionally intelligent society. That is 2.8 million people who could have been guideposts showing others the way to more emotionally intelligent behaviors, but are instead struggling to keep their own skills sharp. The battle of the sexes, EQ and gender. Sheila began her career as a financial consultant specializing in healthcare at a multinational consulting firm. It only took a few years of dazzling clients and garnering rave reviews from upper management before she was eventually snatched up by her current employer, a large regional healthcare system in the Midwest. Still in her early 30s, Sheila is already an assistant vice president on the fast track to a C-level appointment. Her past and current superiors unanimously agree that Sheila is smart, yet there's something else, something they can't quite put a finger on. Early in Sheila's consulting career, after watching her diffuse tense situations with clients time and again, her former manager summed up the secret to Sheila's success. She just gets people. In 2003, we found some stark contrasts between the EQ skills expressed by men and those found in women like Sheila. Women outperformed men in self-management, social awareness, and relationship management. In fact, self-awareness was the only EQ skill in which men were able to keep pace with women. But times have changed, and so have men. Men and women are still neck and neck in their ability to recognize their own emotions, just as in 2003. But men have caught up in their ability to manage their own emotions. Chalk this change up to nothing more than shifting social norms. This evolution of cultural mores benefits men. Men are now encouraged to pay their emotions some extra thought, which goes a long way toward clearer thinking. Not surprisingly, we found that a full 70% of male leaders who rank in the top 15% in decision-making skills also score the highest in emotional intelligence skills. In contrast, not one single male leader with low EQ was among the most skilled decision-makers. Although this seems counterintuitive, it turns out that paying attention to your emotions is the most logical way to make good decisions. So instead of feeling like time spent addressing angst or frustration is somehow a sign of weakness, men are now free to get a stronger handle on their emotions in the name of sound judgment. It's lonely at the top. Considering the mountains of literature about EQ, you'd think corporate executives would be pretty smart about it. As we revealed in our Harvard Business Review article, Heartless Bosses, our research shows that the message still isn't getting through. We have measured EQ in 500,000 senior executives, including 1,000 CEOs, managers, and line employees across industries on 6 continents. Scores climb with titles from the bottom of the corporate ladder upward toward middle management. Middle managers stand out with the highest EQ scores in the workforce. But up beyond middle management, there is a steep downward trend in EQ scores. For the titles of director and above, scores descend faster than a snowboarder on a black diamond. CEOs, on average, have the lowest EQ scores in the workplace. A leader's primary function is to get work done through people. You might think, then, that the higher the position, the better the people skills. It appears the opposite is true. Too many leaders are promoted because of what they know or how long they have worked, rather than for their skill in managing others. Once they reach the top, they actually spend less time interacting with staff. Yet among executives, those with the highest EQ scores are the best performers. We've found that EQ skills are more important to job performance than any other leadership skill. The same holds true for every job title. Those with the highest EQ scores within any position outperform their peers. The generational divide, EQ and age. The mass exodus of baby boomers from the workplace has already begun. According to the U.S. Office of Personnel Management, between 2006 and 2010, boomer retirement will have robbed American companies of nearly 290,000 full-time experienced employees. Silver hair, pension funds, and personal memories of the Kennedy assassinations are not the only things our struggling economic engine will lose when boomers settle into the quiet life. Boomers hold the majority of top leadership roles in the workplace, and their retirement creates a leadership gap that must be filled by the next generations. The question is whether or not the boomers' successors are up to the challenge. We wanted to find out. We broke EQ scores down into the 4 generations in today's workplace. Generation Y, 18 to 30 years old. Generation X, 31 to 43 years old. Baby boomers, 43 to 61 years old. And traditionalists, 62 to 80 years old. When we looked at each of the 4 core EQ skills separately, a huge gap emerged between boomers and Gen Y in self-management. In a nutshell, baby boomers are much less prone to fly off the handle when things don't go their way than the younger generations. It may not appear that this should create any real cause for concern. After all, retirement has been a fact of life ever since FDR signed the Social Security Act. The generation that designated Dennis Hopper as its unofficial spokesman proved capable of filling the superhuman-sized work boots of the greatest generation. So, how hard can it be for the leaders in waiting to replace the easy rider generation? Without well-honed self-management skills, it might be a lot harder than we think. Of course, while Gen Y's approach may be different from the boomers' approach, many would argue that it isn't any worse. Actually, when you consider how knowledgeable and technically proficient Gen Yers are, they might even have a leg up on their predecessors in the information age. However, it should be clear by now that there is a lot more to leadership than being a walking Wikipedia. So, if Gen Yers can't manage themselves, how can we expect them to manage, much less lead, others? At TalentSmart, we went round and round debating the possible explanations for this chasm in self-management skill between the experienced and youthful. One possibility seemed that coming of age with too many video games, instantaneous internet gratification, and doting parents has created a generation of self-indulgent young workers who can't help but wear their emotions on their sleeve in tense situations. However, we weren't convinced. When we looked at the data from another angle, the picture became clearer. Self-management skills appear to increase steadily with age. 60-year-olds scored higher than 50-year-olds, who scored higher than 40-year-olds, and so on. That means the younger generation's deficient self-management skills have little to do with things we can't change, like the effects of growing up in the age of iPods and MySpace. Instead, Gen Xers and Gen Yers just haven't had as much life in which to practice managing their emotions. That's good news, because practice is something Gen Yers can get. Reversing the hands of time to go back and change their upbringing might be tricky. This discovery says as much about the malleable nature of EQ as it does about the difference between generations. With practice, anyone can, and many people do, become more skilled at picking up on emotions and managing them. Developing these skills takes time, but a little conscious effort can cut that time down to a fraction of how long it would ordinarily take. One of Gen Y's signature traits is its enormous capacity to soak up new information and to acquire new skills. That means it's almost entirely up to each individual to do the legwork necessary to speed up the development pace of his or her EQ. For members of Gen Y, the option is to either let years of experience run their course, waiting until their 50s to master their emotions, or to take their development into their own hands. If Gen Yers choose to, they can start now. By the time Gen Yers reach their 30s, they can be poised to lead like seasoned veterans. With boomers retiring sooner rather than later, talented 20-somethings not only can prepare themselves for leadership roles today, the Gen Yers must. Those Gen Yers who take the time and the effort to train themselves to resist the temptation to speak when it won't help a situation, and to keep the lines of communication open even when upset, will be the ones who are tapped to fill the vacant leadership positions in tomorrow's organizations. Along with those positions will come not only better pay, but also the ability to make the changes Gen Yers so desperately want to see in the world around them.